So we think about the 4Ps for how we think about our areas. For some areas, it's really clear what kind of key programs we would have in place. So for mission, we have a thing called the Life Series. That's our big program that we're trying to both see non-Christians come along to, but also equip Christians in evangelism through. For ministry, it's a little bit trickier because all of our kind of programs, so to speak, happen in the life of the church under other areas to a degree. And so this is the breakdown, just practically how I view how we kind of do serve. And this, I think, can fit in a smaller church, but it will feel very formal and maybe too drawn apart. So just be aware of that. But so thinking about one of the big things is just having that time for the person to think about our theological convictions and the culture and how that's being played out, and getting clear on what we want to see and continuing to think about that and assessing that. And a lot of that will come down to our inputs and outputs that we'll talk about in a bit. But then also seeing the ministry teams across church as our responsibility. And so looking for effectiveness and consistency within ministry teams. And so this was hinted at a little bit throughout the conference, but we want ministry teams to be a place where people get discipled, not just where they do a task. So we'd love to see the Word of God opened, even if it's just for a couple of minutes before a welcome team get together. They have a little huddle. Someone shares an encouraging Bible passage, something that stands out and shows how this team fits into everything we're doing as a church. And they're relationally connected. They're doing ministry together. So in rosters, we're often rotated with people, and we don't get the consistency of developing longer term relationships. We want our ministry teams to be a place where people are cared for. And so you're rubbing shoulders. How are you going? Oh, your kid's sick. Maybe I'll serve you informally and take you a cooked meal or something like that. So having someone thinking about how our ministry teams are going across church, or making the shift and from rosters to ministry teams, and thinking strategically about how to do that slowly, and which teams to start with, that might be something that someone's responsible for. Then mobilising. So a large part of the serve area is calling people to serve. And in a smaller church, generally you can put the ownership of calling people to serve in the hands of the different ministries. So you create a ministry team where you've got someone with responsibility and a team leader in place, and then you can make it their role to kind of call people to that ministry. But I would advocate for still having somewhat of a formal process or strategy, and someone with a helicopter view that can see where the needs of church are, because people even within our team, there's on senior staff, there's people who are better recruiters than others. And if we just let it all go, then the people who are better recruiters will get bigger teams, and the people who are maybe a little bit more timid or for whatever reason aren't good, they'll end up in needs. And so there's someone who's got to kind of oversee that process somewhat of calling people in. We have a whole strategy of what that looks like. And then the other kind of key area under the serve area is development. So thinking about how are we doing training across our whole church, how are we doing leadership. For us, MTS fits under that. So we have a big emphasis on MTS and raising up the next generation through that. And we've implemented a leadership pipeline across church, which has been really helpful over the last 4 years of kind of thinking deliberately how to develop particular people. So we can talk more about any of those if you want, but I'll just go into performance and then say a couple of things. Can you go to the next slide, please, Sam? Thanks, mate. In terms of thinking about kind of the inputs and outputs in the serve area, here are key ones for us. So inputs, obviously preaching, prayer, and culture initiatives. So things like we've done this year in terms of sharing some great experience of transformational teams that people have had, just to promote that culture of wanting to be a part of a discipleship team. That kind of Sunday in October, that's going to be a culture initiative that we're going to try and get implemented. Inputting into our discipleship teams and training. So I do, and some of the people within my team do a bit of consulting with different teams and how they're going and doing their meetings and kind of cultivating that and what training they're doing within their team.
And sorry, could we just, Sam, could you throw I think we're back to people's slide. Are you able to throw that back to the other one that we needed there? Number 4. We're on 1 now, 2, Q&A 3. That's the one.
There we go. All right, thanks, Gus. So then serve chats and a mobilisation strategy in terms of an input and leadership training and platforms. So we have another part-time platform for training for people who will give us a day or 2 a week of their time. We have a part-time mentoring program that we call Harvest. So I'm happy to talk about that too. Then in terms of outputs, the things that we're looking for are the percentage of members serving in a ministry team. But we're not just cold and clinical. We want the nature of serving to be joyful and sacrificial and part of their worship to God as well. We're measuring the ministry needs and what are the priorities around church. And that's just a simple spreadsheet that we use to measure that and to just collect information from staff or team leaders. We have a leadership layer ratio, and we're thinking about our full-time staff to members. The more we can build that ratio of full-time staff to members, I think the better we're doing at equipping leaders to have more members to staff. And I can talk about that ratio. And then we're also measuring how we're going at sending leaders. It's important to us that we're big kingdom thinking. And we actually get a lot of uni churches from Armidale Diocese, and we feel a burden to be producing a lot of young men and women to raise them up and to send them out for the sake of the gospel. And we acknowledge that that's nothing we do as a church just because we're right next to a uni. So there's a couple of things to think through in terms of the serve area programs and performance. What questions do you guys have out of those things, or things specific for your church? Happy can be like, we're wrestling with this. What do you reckon about this? Or